Welcome to Simplify to Scale, a show dedicated to helping you scale a high impact and high profit business that you love without all of the complexity and chaos that can keep you trapped in the day-to-day. I'm your host, Krista Grasso, and with decades of scaling experience, I know what actually works and what's just hype. So if you are done with all of the one-size-fits-all scaling advice and all of the overnight success promises, and instead you want proven practical strategies that will help you simplify operations, elevate your leadership, amplify profits, and scale sustainably, let's dive in and get started. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Simplify to Scale show. Today, we're going to be continuing our series on what it looks like for the future of operations. And this time, we are taking the lens of the visionary and right-hand duo. And with me for this discussion is my right-hand rock star, Miss Jess, as you know, as she's been more present on the podcast lately. And I hope you loved the episodes that she did while I was away, solo and with Annie. So Jess, welcome. I'm excited for today's discussion.
So excited for today's discussion because it's something that shows up so frequently, but it's something that I don't think is talked about quite enough. So I'm excited about that.
It's true. And we have talked about this a little bit in the past. We've done it, and I've done some solo episodes too, but we're going to take a little bit of a different angle today because as we've been talking about the future of operations, I do think there is this incredible opportunity for the relationship between a visionary founder and their right-hand person, whether they're more of an advisor or a consultant, or whether they are an internal, what we would call a chief strategy and operating officer, or maybe an OBM, or whatever that relationship with the kind of core operator in your business who takes your beautiful, big, bold vision and helps bring it to life, keep everything moving, really the person that you rely on so heavily to be able to step back from the day-to-day. That relationship has a lot of opportunity to evolve on both sides. And so we're going to be looking at both angles, sharing some fun stories, giving you a little behind the scenes of what that really looks like and what that could look like as we see some of the shifts happening in the operational space and just in the small business space in general. So Jess, any kind of key thoughts to kick us off before I dive into a little story?
Nothing yet, but I know I'll have a lot to chime in on after we get going.
Absolutely. Because fun fact about Jess is my entire team is actually fractionals. So with the exception of a couple people who work full time, most of my team are fractionals. So not only does Jess work with me and lead things inside our certification program, she leads our Soul Collective. She works privately from a mentor capacity with anyone who's in our certification programs. So for any of you who are listening who do work with us or have worked with us, you work really closely with Jess. But Jess also has her own business, and she works with other clients as well. So just as she sees a lot within my business, she sees a lot within a lot of businesses. So we'll get some fun, different perspectives, not just through the crystal lens today. But here's what I want to share is some of what I'm seeing happening a lot. And I'm changing names here just to kind of protect prior client relationships. But I had a relationship with a client who I'd worked with for a while, and she had this woman who she just absolutely loved. She relied on her so much. We're going to call her Tracy. And I remember in pretty much every one of our calls, she would say, I don't know what I would do without Tracy. Tracy just did this, and Tracy just did this. And I feel like I can actually breathe in my business again. And she put so much into hiring Tracy and finding the right person. It took taken her a little while to find somebody that she really trusted and had as her right hand. I kind of guided her and helped her with that process. And our work had wrapped up, and then we checked in not that long ago. And I said, how are things going? How's Tracy doing? And she said, yeah, I really hope I don't lose her for this, but I actually had to scale back on her hours. And I was a little bewildered. And I said, what happened? Is Tracy okay? Like what's going on? And what had happened was something that I see happening really, really often. And it was her business hit a little bit of a rough patch, as many have over this past year and a half. Her revenue became much less stable. She had to look really carefully at where she was going to cut expenses in the business. And so who did she cut? The person who she viewed as operations. even though this person was the person responsible for keeping the business running, keeping clients happy, driving retention in the business. This person actually had a great deal to do with the growth of the business, but because the founder saw her as operational, when she was making cuts, she was like, well, I can't cut marketing. I can't cut sales. I need leads and I need new clients. So therefore, I must protect these roles. The only roles I can really cut back on are operational. And so she cut back on Tracy. And part of the reason why her and I were connecting was all of a sudden she was feeling the side effect of cutting back on Tracy. All of a sudden, things weren't working quite the way they used to. All of a sudden, there were all of these things now falling on her plate that she didn't even realize that Tracy was doing, because it's just what happens when you have a really great right-hand person, when you have operations that are working really well, a lot of that is kind of invisible. You don't really see it, right? Operations only start screaming at you when you have gaps and issues in the business. But when you have an incredible team and an incredible person who's keeping things running, you don't really feel it. So you start to overlook what's actually happening. You start to overlook what they're doing, and you start to overlook the actual impact that they have on your business. Sometimes I've even had people say, I pay this person a lot and I don't even quite know what they do. And I'm like, do you trust them? Do you think they're doing something dishonest? Do you think they're charging you for work they're not? Oh, no, definitely. I was like, well, then that's a sign they're doing their job really, really well. Like, that's what you want. You want them to be proactively seeing the issues. You want them to be proactively fighting the fires and calming the chaos and doing the things that they need to, so it never makes it to you. Like, it shouldn't make it to you in an ideal world. But this person did what I see so often. And so, Jess, I want you to chime in on this, because I know you've seen a lot of this as well. And this is just such a big mistake, but it's such a common one. And it gets down to part of what we're going to talk about today, which is that relationship and the misunderstanding between the two. So, Jess, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yes. And so thinking about the Tracy scenario more in depth and just listening to it, it's something that's so common, to the point where for operations to be typically the first thing, it's just like, okay, can't cut marketing, can't cut sales. But then what do you do once you get the person in, you get a new client and you're happy to get things going? But operationally, it's, if things are out of whack and just not in alignment, then things are going to fall through and you won't be able to retain the client. And so deliverables start to shift. The founder ends up being in a very stressful state. Then it's like that stress turns into resentment. Then that turns into projection. And then not only that, clients actually feel a lot of those things. They sense it, and they can detect that in your engagement. So it impacts so many components. And not only that, let's not even get into how that can hinder the reputation that you have in the market. And so it's one of those things to where now, and especially with the way everything is so available, there's a lot of risk that's involved when ops is the first thing that you cut. And so, especially when you have someone that's well-rounded that can look at things from a holistic perspective, the ops informs a lot of the way that sales sales takes place, the way the sales function works within your business, as well as marketing. And so when you take out that component of basically the glue that holds everything together, then I've consistently noticed that founders find themselves in a space where they're overwhelmed, then they hit burnout, then they're ready to get out of the day-to-day, not out of desire of just wanting to expand and do more, but they're wanting to get out of the day-to-day because they're trying to escape the reality that is often impacted by the decision to cut the operations.
Yeah, it's true. Ops is often the last hired and the first cut. And it is not the right decision in most businesses. And the caveat that I will say is a lot of times people don't fully understand what they really need in a good operational leader. And so what happened even with this client was it took a couple tries before she found Tracy. And if you don't really know what you're hiring for, if you don't really know what you're looking for, then sometimes it can take a little bit to get the right person. But assuming you have that right person, that person is gold in your business. You hold that person and you do not ever, ever cut them. But I think that the operational leaders, the right hands, those who work with, maybe you also work with small businesses, even though you're your own founder, you also support other businesses in their own growth and scale. And so one of the things that's so super important to keep in mind, and I hear this a lot with clients who are in my certification programs, is I wish founders understood ops. I don't get why they don't get it, right? And there's this frustration, this, how do they not know that what we do is actually what makes all that growth possible? How do they not see the impact that we have on the success of the business? And so I'll get that lens of frustration from people who don't quite grasp how the founder can't see the value in what they do. But the conversation that I end up having with them, and this is so important, and again, even if you don't consider yourself an operator, but you serve other businesses, this is true for you as well, is it is not the founder's job to see that value. It is your job to communicate that value. And I always tell operators, you're there because the visionary is a visionary. They're not an operator. They see vision, they see possibility, they see ideas. They create something that doesn't exist and bring it to life in the market. That is the place when they are in their superpower. It's not their job to understand operations. It's not their superpower to understand operations. Yes, as a good, responsible business owner, you need to understand things in the business. And the more seasoned a business owner is, the more they do understand those things. So instead of being frustrated that the visionary doesn't understand operations, recognize that that's why they hire you. They're trying to stay in their superpower, in their zone of genius. They're bringing you in to work in yours so they don't have to work outside their zone of genius. And what the best thing that you can do is learn to speak visionary. Learn to put things in their perspective, learn to put things in their language. And when I think about this in terms of like a travel analogy, right? I've got a trip coming up to Aruba this fall. I'm super excited about it. But if I think about that, right? I just want to get to Aruba. My goal is Aruba. My goal is relaxation. My goal is spending time on the beach. I am not thinking about what airport I need to go to and how I need to get there. I just want to get there, and I want to get there as quick as possible. I want ideally no layovers. I don't want any issues. I just want to be able to show up, and I want it to be amazing, right? When you are the visionary in the business, that tends to be how we think. We've got this idea, we've got this destination we want to get to, and we just want to get there as simply as possible. We don't care about the details. We just want to get to the destination. Well, your right-hand person, they're the ones figuring out all of the detail. They're booking flights. They're trying to look at layovers. They're trying to see if there's a direct option. They're trying to make sure that you could check your bags. They're arranging all of the details so you could get to that destination. Where I think the biggest disconnect comes in is, as a visionary, if I have my visionary hat on, I am speaking in destination. Right hand tends to speak in journey. They tend to speak in the flight and the stop and the layover, in the bag check, and all those details that I don't care. I just want to be in Aruba. Like, am I going to be there, and is it going to be simple? Cool. Like, and this is the challenge a lot, is it's different languages because it's different focuses. And it doesn't take a lot for the person who's coordinating all my travel to just say, here we go. You're going to be in Aruba. I got you there as quick as possible. There is one thing that we do need to be aware of, but it's right. Start with the destination, put it in language I can understand and I care about. Don't tell me I called 12 airports. I did this, and then we did here, and we weren't going to have a bag check here. But you got to, like, all of those things. I'm like, am I just going to get to Aruba? Like, how quick can I get to Aruba? And so I think it's more that language that needs to shift, where anyone who's serving a founder of any kind, a small business of any kind, has to put things in the language that they care about and the things that they understand, even if there were 27 steps that went into making it happen. It's about framing it in the right positioning for them. So, Jess, I think you have a real world example of this. We'll get out of analogy land here, and I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yes, yes. And so when I hear you say and just kind of speak to the journey versus the destination, etc., it's that has come up every single time, just because that is the norm. And so across industries, size of business, whatever the organization type might be, it could be nonprofit, for profit, whatever the case is, I have noticed that that is something that is just, it's consistent. Now, there might be the rare instance where you have a unicorn, which I know that you to be the one of the unicorns, but it's still, even with that, we still have to, as I complement the working relationship that we have, I still have those moments to where it'll be like, okay, Krista, let's talk about this. Let me extract this information from your brain, and then let me do what I do in terms of coordinating the journey, because I want you to stay in your visionary space as much as possible. But one of the real life examples that come to mind as you're saying all of that is one of my clients. And my happy place is working with the team and building everything up and having a structure in place. And so as I navigated this journey with my client, his perspective was that he really wanted to just get out of the day-to-day, more so out of burnout and being tired, etc. So when you're at that space, you just want to be done. You're ready to get to Aruba. And so me informing him that there are so many details that matter, but letting him know that it's going to take a little bit longer, but let's create this plan. So we created a strategic plan, had a deadline for the certain month. And so we mapped it out. It was a 6-month plan and we were ready to go. And so ready to execute. And what happened? He decided that he was like, you know what, I'm going to pull the plug right now. I'm going to do this. I'm not going to follow the plan. And I'm just going to go for it. And so after I was informed, because he consulted with me prior to finalizing, but I was like, I caution you against this. These are the reasons why. These are the risks involved. And so I want you to think through all of this before you just hire these 2 people in these very significant leadership roles. And so he was like, well, no big deal. I'm going to take on the onboarding. I'm going to go ahead and get them started, and they'll be doing this. And not only that, let me mention, this is a client-facing role as well. And so there were so many components to that, to where I was in my ops brain, I was like, wait a minute, hold on. There are so many components that we need to make sure, because there's this domino effect. It's like, you want to be mindful of this before you do that, because now you are potentially putting client trust at risk, client retention at risk. And then that, it essentially is going to impact revenue. You're going to have a higher churn rate. There are so many components that we need to think through. And I was like, and you're in a space of actually scaling also. And so I'm cautioning you, but ahead of time, before you make this decision. And he made the decision, because he even says, well, Jessica, I'm impatient. And I was like, I'm aware, but I was like, this might cost you more time on the back end than you realize. And so I stood firm. I was confident in what I was saying, but I did everything I could to contribute, because he pressed play and we were full-fledged ahead, and then started out the year. And so we started out the year, 2 new hires. We're going, he's confident. And then after we start doing the check-ins, because now we're implementing the plan after the fact. So now we're in more of just kind of like damage recovery, because he did the onboarding differently than what we have already outlined in the process. So it's not that it's not created. It was already outlined. Everything down to the month, to the 30, 60, 90-day rollout, everything. But now it's, let me do this onboarding a little differently, get the training. So we lost about the first 30 days. And then 30-day check-in, I come in, and so it's very fragmented. There's not a lot of consistency. There's a lot of miscommunication. And then it's like, okay, I'm checking in with them like I normally would, trying to talk about, okay, let's do a tap in with KPIs, unaware that their KPIs were what they were, all of these things. So this becomes a snowball, and I'm talking about a big snowball. We're looking like snowman snowball. Okay. And so as we start to progress through the working relationship, we're starting to notice that, okay, clients are not as happy, because there's a gap in knowledge and communication and expectations internally, even SLAs are not being met in a consistent way. So there are so many components that are just starting to just be glaring red flags. So at this point, we have a touch point. So we're having the founder and right hand conversation. And so it's just like, hey, what do you want to do? Do we need to course correct? Because this is becoming a bigger issue. And we're realizing how it's also impacting the rest of the team, because the team culture is starting to shift. There are so many components that are just very, very significant. And so immediately you start to see, it's almost in a sense of like hiring remorse. And he's like, okay, maybe I moved too fast. Maybe I did this. So you can see the real-time reflection. And then he gets to the point where he's in the day-to-day more than ever, because he's also having to do a lot of damage control, where he's having to chime into emails. He's having to jump in on client meetings now, where he wasn't having to do that before. And so now we fast forward about 90 days in, and now we're doing a final evaluation, because this is where we communicate, is this going to be a reciprocal dynamic that we want to continue, or do we want to, basically part ways? And so one employee decided that she wanted to leave, which was fine. So she opted out and she left. And then another instance is right around 92, 93 days. The other one was let go. And so we had to go back to the drawing board. And then it's like, okay, let's do an assessment of the entire team. And so we did that. And then I said, okay, here we are in the same place. Now, I suggest that we do it this way. And then we follow the process. And this is the reason why. Yet again. So it's a reminder. But what I say all of that to say this: I think it's really important at times to make sure you stand your ground and you speak up. But as the right hand, you already know what's possible. You want to definitely do everything to encourage success. So I'm not saying sabotage anything. But what I am saying is, from the right hand perspective, is sometimes you have to allow them to see the importance of having the processes and following those steps accordingly. And that's literally just like basically following the map along the journey. And so you can stop and sightsee and do all the detours you want, but at the same time, if your goal is to get to that destination, you need to be mindful of actually following the navigation as they're trying to tell you the steps and which turn to take. And so now since 2 director level people have been hired, followed the process, less than 30 days, they have acquired, one, getting more qualified people by vetting them accordingly, and actually following the proper hiring process, getting a role success kit in place and actually executing upon that, and having a mapped out plan to the point where the founder hasn't even been involved in the onboarding besides 2 Q&A calls. And so the beauty of that is the fact that he's no longer spending his time doing the things that he shouldn't have to do, because he actually has me in place for that reason itself. So it's knowing that, okay, if you trust the journey, or trust the process rather, then you're more likely to get to the result that you're desiring quicker, in a more efficient way, to the point where you now have improved the team culture. You've introduced team members in a way to where they feel confident, you're empowering them in their role, and the outcome is much greater. And so all of that in a nutshell lets you know that sometimes that disconnect is so critical, to the point where it's like, if you slow down enough and then just listen and trust that the navigation, because you might have in your head, well, I know this back route. That's fine, but maybe the navigation isn't taking you that way because there's a complete roadblock. And so you have to be able to trust that. So that's one scenario that comes to mind, Krista, and there's so many more, but I wanted to at least just chime in on that, because it's a very real thing, especially from the right hand perspective.
Yeah, and it's such a good example, because I see this so often, right? And going back to my example of Aruba, I just want to get there as quick as possible. I want to get there as quick as possible. And I can tell you right now, I might have my team who, in my case, it would be Kylie, who would literally be the one who is doing this for me and booking my travel and all of that. But if she's off there and she's working on it and I don't hear progress and I don't know where it is, and all of a sudden I see something and I'm like, ooh, I could book this and I'll get there. And I would do that in a heartbeat. And she would want to throttle me, but I would do that. And I have had to learn over the years of us working together. My gosh, we've worked together. I think it's 11 or 12 years now. But I have had to learn to not do that and to patience myself. Patience is not my strong suit. Most visionaries do not have a lot of patience. But I've had to learn to say, no, I trust that she has this. Every single time I go off and reactively do the thing that I want to do because my visionary brain is like, ooh, I've got this figured out. I can do this quicker. I could get there. Like, I have regretted it every time. It's like if you use Waze and you have this route that you take every time and you don't listen to Waze, you're like, why is Waze taking me this way? This doesn't make any sense. And you ignore it. And then you end up spending an hour in traffic and you're like, I should have just listened to the darn app. Every time I ignore it, I regret it. But I've had to learn this the hard way, right? Instead of reacting and doing what I think is better or quicker or faster, or the thing that came to me as this moment of incredible, like inspiration, of course, right? I have to trust in my team to do what they do incredibly well, right? And Kylie handles all of my travel, right? Jess, I learned to trust in the business for pretty much all things because she keeps the entire business running. She leads the team, right? She works at that strategy level that I've been talking about. She is truly my right-hand person in the business. And I have to trust that she is here because I trust her to make those decisions. I trust her to do the pieces I don't want to do in my own business that ironically I do in my clients' businesses, but that's besides the point. But in my own business, right, I just want to get to the darn destination as quick as possible. And Jess is the one who's doing all of the analysis and looking and trying to figure out what's the best way to actually get there, and not just the way to get there right now, but the way that's going to be sustainable. The way, like considering everything she mentioned in the example with her client, it's not just how quickly we're getting this person in, but what about the client experience? What about the impact to culture and to the rest of the team? All of these things that I might not be thinking of because I'm just focused on the destination. She's focused on the journey. And so when you bring somebody in, A, you need somebody at the right level and somebody that you can have that level of trust in. But then B, you need to trust the person. You need to trust the person to do what you brought them in to do and fight your natural instinct to find that better, quicker, immediate, do now way that all of us have a tendency to want to do if we have a drop of visionary in our blood. Like it's just natural. And so that to me, when I really look towards what it will take in the future of operations, and again, I'm saying that term because this series is more focused on that, but this is really just the future of business success, right? With the changes that are happening that I've talked about a lot. Don't need to belabor that, but just things need to be leaner. Things need to be more intentional. There's not as much space for things to not work. There's not as much extra padding in typically our bank accounts for things to go terribly wrong, right? We're always in a place of experimentation, right? Quickly finding out what's working, which sometimes means things don't work so we can move to the next thing, right? Things are never going to be perfect, but we need to be more strategic and intentional about the things that we're doing. And that is where it's so critical to have the right hand and to trust them to do what you hired them to do, which is make sure those decisions are made really intentionally and that you get where you're trying to go in the best way possible, even if it feels slower, even if it feels longer, even if you can't quite understand why on earth they are taking you on the particular journey that they are taking you. You have to trust that it's actually going to go where it is. And it doesn't mean blind trust. You can ask questions because sometimes they might not be considering something you're thinking or vice versa. It needs to be a conversation and a collaboration. But I think that that is what the relationship needs to look like so that you can actually get yourself out of the day to day. So you can not be pulled back into everything all the time. And some of that trust, where I see the trust not existing. And again, this is for anyone with a right hand hat on, including you, if you work with other businesses, even if you identify more as a visionary, is being able to communicate in the language that the business you are working with or the founder you are working with understands and cares about. You can't belabor the pieces that aren't them. Most people, like the Tracy example, end up getting scaled back or end up things changing because they didn't understand how to speak visionary. They didn't understand how to speak outcomes. They didn't understand how to make the invisible of what they do visible in a way that was really relevant and meaningful to that founder or visionary, so that they could see just how much their role contributed to the growth and scale that the founder is focused on. And that to me is so incredibly important. So Jess, any thoughts on that?
Yes. One of the things that comes to mind, especially as you were mentioning being able to trust, and if you don't even understand everything that they're doing, but being able to speak in the language or in founder speak, so to speak, it's one of those things where if they don't always see it up front, it's making sure that you come full circle so that they can. And so just a very short example is I'm very firm on using agendas consistently with the team. And although it seems like, oh, I don't function that way. Well, some people may not function that way. That may be what they say. But at the same time, it's once the team is very aware of the consistent structure, then that's how you get out of the day to day. Because if one day you don't show up to the meeting because you have something else to do or you're on vacation or whatever the case is, you have the ability to actually not be present physically or virtually, and the show still gets to go on. So that's how you get to have that space and create that space. And so the team still knows what to do. They function. They don't miss a beat. You still get the updates. You can go back and look at a recording to see the consistent flow. And the thing is, you may not understand that up front, but the importance of knowing that your team understands that and can function without you in that sense, that allows you to see the value. And so I think as a right hand, sometimes it's important to make that come full circle to where it's like, hey, did you notice that whenever you were out, everything was able to continue? Or let's just say that both the founder and the right hand are both out, then the team can still continue even in your absence. And so making sure that they're aware of that, but not in a boastful way, but being able to increase that value in those things that they may not see the importance of in that moment. So I think that's extremely critical to make sure that you are showing that value in a way and communicating it to where they may not see it up front, but then they can eventually see the value over time.
Yeah, it's true, because most visionaries, unless they've come from maybe more of a structured background, or unless they've been in business long enough that they've already seen the value in structure, will usually kind of buck against structure in the beginning. And the irony is, and this is true for me, and I know it's true for a lot of my clients, I'm not going to say it's true for everybody, but to me, structure actually gives me freedom. A pure blank page, sometimes you just stare and you're like, it's like almost so unstructured that you don't know what to do. Whereas when you have a container to work within or some kind of structure to work within, especially if it's a supportive structure and not one that's naturally constraining your creativity, right? When you have that supportive structure, all of a sudden, for me anyway, it allows me to be more creative. It allows me to be more innovative. It allows me to do what I do best better than if I had no structure. And people will oftentimes buck against that structure until they have that experience and they start to realize it. But even though I naturally welcome structure, and I mean, for literally for my entire business, I build structure for other people to leverage. But a new structure, my initial reaction is still, we don't need that. And I have to coach myself and take the step back to say, no, let's experiment with this. Let's give it a try. Let's see if this actually does make things better. And 90% of the time it does. And so I think that is as the visionary, trusting in that structure, giving it the space to experiment with it and see if it works and see if it has the results. And as the right hand, being able to do exactly what Jess said is not only help the visionary or founder understand what it should do from an outcome perspective, not a task perspective or a like detail perspective, from an outcome perspective, but highlight where it worked, highlight the benefits. If Jess is like, listen, we need to do this agenda, and I'm like, we don't need a darn agenda, but I reluctantly give in, I'm not going to see when I got back from the like 2-week excursion with Jess where we went and mapped out the business for the next 3 years that, oh, it was that agenda that made everything run without me. My brain's not there, right? And so it would be up to Jess to gently remind me, remember early on when, we weren't quite sure if the structure thing was going to be super valuable when we looked at our meetings? Well, look at what this enabled and how the team was able to do this without us, right? And that might be a made up scenario in our business, but it's that sort of thing that happens all of the time, where I think that's part of that relationship working well together and learning how to speak visionary if you are a right hand, and being willing to understand and put trust in the operations and in that journey if you are a visionary.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah.
All right. So we could talk about this for days and days and days and days and days, but that feels like a good pin in this episode. There will be more. I think I'm going to do 5 parts in the series. TBD, this is part 3. So stay tuned, more to come. But Jess, thanks so much for being back on the show and sharing your insights and perspectives today.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.
All right. I hope you got tons of value out of this. If you know anybody who would benefit from this entire series, please do send it to them. And I will be back with you again next week. Thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode of Simplify to Scale. If you'd like to take things further, I invite you to join me for my Scale Smarter, Not Harder interactive workshop. Head to strategicopsinstitute.com/scale smarter to get registered. Not only will we dive into what might be keeping you trapped in the day-to-day, but you'll have the opportunity to ask me your questions live. If you got value out of today's episode, I'd love if you'd take a moment and rate and review the show so more businesses can learn to scale more simply and sustainably. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode, and I'll see you again next week.